Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. For months, former President Donald Trump was leading the presidential race in North Carolina. But in recent weeks, he's fallen behind. Part of it has to do with Kamala Harris entering the race and energizing Democrats. But now, some political analysts say Trump's odds of winning the state could be hurt not just by Harris, but by a member of his own party. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran joins us to explain. Will, welcome back.
Nice talking to you.
Will, give us a quick update on the presidential race. Trump was ahead. Now the race is neck and neck. What's new at the top of the ticket?
Yes, well, obviously the main change has been the replacement on the Democratic side, switching out Joe Biden for Kamala Harris. And, going back to May and June, Trump was leading Biden in North Carolina. We were seeing polls by 7, 8, I think even up to 10 points here, which was, that would just be a complete blowout given North Carolina's recent history of being a really tight, closely competitive state. Now, in the last probably 6 weeks or so, we have seen really statistical ties in all the polls. Some of them show Trump up by 1 or 2 points. Some of them show Harris up by 1 or 2 points. But really, it's all, it's a toss-up. And so there's just, this really huge change in the vibes. Trump has started coming here and giving speeches now, which he wasn't doing when Biden was the candidate. His campaign has actually started buying ads in North Carolina, which he hadn't been doing before. So he's really trying to kind of play catch up because Democrats had been focusing on North Carolina the whole time. And, we've seen Trump really try to get back here and, treat it more like he was in 2016 and 2020.
And you also have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dropping out of the race, endorsing Trump. So obviously movement in that race is having impact, different players, different results. But now we're hearing that one race further down the ballot could affect the presidential outcome here.
That's right. The race for governor. We have Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein, Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson as the leading candidates running for governor. And there's been some growing concern among Republicans as they see some of the polls that come out that Robinson might be dragging down Trump and hurting his chances here in North Carolina. Robinson has a history of making divisive statements about women, about Jewish people, about LGBTQ people. And as I've said, we see these polls that show the presidential race is basically tied. But at the same time, those polls are also showing Stein leading Robinson anywhere from 6 to 10 points. So the same, huge margin that Trump used to be leading Biden by and had Trump basically not even paying attention to North Carolina because they assumed it was just a done deal. We are now seeing Stein leading by those same sorts of margins in the governor's race. So that is starting to give Republicans a little concern here in North Carolina.
Now, we've heard comments from Mick Mulvaney. We've heard them from Republican strategists. What are they saying?
Yeah, so Mick Mulvaney, who was Trump's White House chief of staff, a former South Carolina congressman who knows North Carolina pretty well, he said this explicitly. He said, I think that the main reason we're seeing Harris beating Trump in some of these North Carolina polls is because there's an unpopular candidate for governor in that state on the Republican side. So he's laying the blame completely at Robinson's feet. Doug Hay, another North Carolinian who's a former top GOP official, pretty prominent up in D.C., said, there are these concerns inside the Republican Party, and it's time to start watching. Does Trump start distancing himself from Robinson? The last time that Trump was in North Carolina recently speaking in Asheboro, Mark Robinson was at that event, but he did not give a speech. And that is very different from what we've seen the last really 2+ years. Almost every time Trump has been in North Carolina, which has been a lot, Robinson often speaks right before him or a few people before him, but they're often together. And, Trump has called Robinson, the next coming of Martin Luther King Jr. And, and now he wasn't even given a speaking slot in Asheboro.
Were those comments from Hay and Mulvaney any surprise?
Well, surprising in that people were willing to say this publicly and before the election, yes. But at the same time, it's no secret that, Mark Robinson is who he is and has made these comments. We reported here at WRAL 3 years ago that there were concerns within the GOP over Robinson's history of these sorts of comments, driving away your suburban voters, more moderate voters, even Democrats, who might be, there are some Democrats who like Trump. But, would they be willing to also go for Robinson? Maybe not. And, that it wasn't just, that article we wrote 3 years ago. The whole GOP primary in March for governor focused almost entirely on the question of, is Mark Robinson electable? All of the other candidates who were running against him said, look, he's a fine guy. I just don't think that he can win North Carolina in a general election. We are too closely divided, and just given his history, he's not going to be able to do it. And in the end, Republican voters weren't swayed by that message. They either didn't believe it or didn't care. Robinson won with, I think it was more votes than all the competition combined, or just about more votes. And so, Republicans, clearly really like him, at least the base does. The question is just those more moderate Republicans, the suburban Republicans, the folks who decide elections here in North Carolina, are they starting to really go more towards Stein?
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear what Robinson has to say about his chances. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about the presidential and gubernatorial races in North Carolina. Will, North Carolinians have a long history of voting for a Democratic governor and a Republican president. What's different here?
Yeah, there's not a ton different, but you have to remember we're a state that's often won on the margins. In 2016, when Roy Cooper beat Pat McCrory, it was by like 10,000 votes out of millions. It was a percentage of the vote. And so, it's little things here and there that, can turn an election in North Carolina. And I think there's a couple differences. One is that, Republicans were thinking, okay, this really is our shot to get a Republican in the governor's office. There's no incumbent anymore. We don't have to run against Roy Cooper. And, hopefully back when Biden was still the Democratic, presumed nominee, it looked like Trump was going to win by a fairly large margin in North Carolina. So, you would carry him over, even if, there were those classic voters here in North Carolina who will vote Trump for president, but a Democrat for governor. They were hoping that Trump would win by enough that he could carry Robinson over the finish line. And part of it, too, is that, Josh Stein, the Democratic nominee, I think it's fair to say is more liberal than candidates that the Democrats have run in the past for governor. And so, Republicans really saw an opening here. But what's different is that, Robinson just has this history of, past statements on social media and in these churches to speeches he's given that candidates like Pat McCrory have not had dragging them down, that, were able to, obviously Pat McCrory won here before Cooper unseated him. So I think that is the key difference, is just, it's the candidate.
Now, abortion is expected to be an issue that drives people to the polls, and it seems like Robinson has really worked to kind of shift his approach to his messaging on that. Is that a response to what he's seeing in the polls?
You have to imagine, yeah. The very first ad that Josh Stein came out with was, I don't think it mentioned Stein at all until the very end, where it said, paid for by Stein for governor. But all it was just Mark Robinson talking in his own words, talking about abortion. And that clearly moved a lot of voters. And to the point where Robinson now, instead of having ads of his own attacking Stein or promoting his own issues, is kind of going on defense, and is coming out with this ad that you referenced where he says, I am changing my approach on abortion, and kind of acknowledging that some of these harsh comments I've made in the past were not the right approach. I now understand that the right approach is to, be more compassionate, more empathetic with women. It talked about his and his wife's decision to have an abortion themselves years ago, which, he is credited with since changing his thinking on abortion in general. So yes, he's clearly trying to moderate, and I think it is clearly an acknowledgement that ad from Stein's folks did work and did drive some of this, big boost in the polling that Stein is seeing, even relative to Kamala Harris here.
Now, while he may be playing defense in that area, he seems to also be shifting his talking points to things that he wants to do as governor, right?
Yeah. He said publicly during this campaign, I don't want to talk about abortion anymore, even though he's now out on the airwaves with an ad about it because he felt like he had to. But he really would like to be focusing on other issues, things that he sees as a bigger electoral strength for himself. Recently he put out policy plans for his economic and public safety platforms. He talks about education a lot. He tries to avoid criticizing teachers themselves, but also says, in our classrooms, we're, pushing really inappropriate material on children. And, if he's elected governor, he's going to crack down on that and, change the way that the public schools operate here in North Carolina. So those are the sorts of issues that he's hoping to focus on when he doesn't have to be addressing all of the other things.
Now, you were out on the campaign trail with him this week, and you had a chance to speak with him. What does he have to say about the polls, the criticism that he's hearing from people within his own party, and whether or not he's being a drag on Donald Trump?
Yeah, he, of course, denies that he is dragging Trump down. I asked him directly about those comments that Mick Mulvaney, Trump's ex-chief of staff, had made, that the reason why Trump isn't polling well in North Carolina is because of Robinson. He said, that's just not true. There's no daylight between me and Trump, and we were at this diner in Washington out on the Pamlico River, and it was crowded. There was well over 100 people in this pretty tiny diner there to see him. And he said accurately, look around at this crowd. Half the people here are in Trump hats or Trump shirts. There's no daylight between us. And so he thinks that, in the end, people are going to want, the policies they're pushing, the MAGA agenda, and that, if you're going to go out and vote for one, you're going to go out and vote for the other. There's questions if that's actually true. The Elon poll that just released this past week said that actually about 1 in every 6 Republican voters plans on being a ticket splitter this year. And, some of those people could be voting for Kamala Harris and also Mark Robinson, but I think it stands to reason that a majority of them are going to be voting for Donald Trump and Josh Stein if those numbers turn out to be true.
Now, as we get closer to the election, and it's not that far away, what are you going to be watching for in this race, particularly as it pertains to the presidential election?
Yeah, there's a few key things to watch. So we talked to some Democratic strategists, and they said, we are very aware of everything these Republicans are saying about Robinson dragging Trump down. And, don't be surprised if you start seeing some ads from the Harris campaign talking about Mark Robinson specifically in North Carolina, trying to really make that explicit connection and trying to use Robinson as an anchor on Trump. So, we're obviously going to be watching to see if, this leads to, Kamala Harris changing her strategy in North Carolina. The other thing is, what is Donald Trump's strategy continue to be? He's going to be here in North Carolina a lot, or J.D. Vance is going to be here, or other surrogates for their campaign. We're going to be seeing them almost constantly for the next 2 months from here until the election. And so does Mark Robinson continue to speak at these Trump rallies to introduce him when he comes on stage? Do they continue backslapping each other? Or is there a little bit of the distance between the two of them? And, how does the polling look? That's obviously the big question.
Going to be a very interesting few weeks. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL state government reporter Will Doran for his breakdown of the Robinson effect on Trump. Check out his article at the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.